Alright, let's continue. So in the last few videos, we've created our form with the design that we're happy with. Then we've created some functions for the buttons. We're going to do more of them later. And in the very last video, we created a character sheet class. Now for this video, what we're going to do is we're going to evolve from having a character sheet to having a list or multiple character sheets. And the way we do that is we use a very special type of data called a list. And when we type list, we can see there's parentheses. Or not parentheses, there's like angled brackets. There's, less than, greater than. And what happens is when we use these angled brackets, what we put in the middle is the type of data we're putting into our list. So we can create a list of character sheets. So we can call this maybe the player list. Player list. So instead of having some character, we're going to have a player list. Alright. So everywhere that we see some character, I'm going to replace that and implement the player list. And we're going to redo everything we did in the last video, but adding the player list instead. And the player list is actually going to represent multiple pieces of data. So when we create our form and initialize the form, we also create some characters. So instead, we're going to create a player list. So the player list equals a new. And when we hit tab, Visual Studio is awesome. It tells us exactly what. So if I just hit enter, all that is done, and I just have to put the parentheses. And we can put arguments in here, which is why Visual Studio doesn't do anymore. But because this is a list, technically we've created the list object, but we have not actually created a character sheet to put in the list. So we have to add, right now the list has nothing in it. There are 0 things in the list. So I am going to add a new element to the list. So I'm going to say player list dot, and then the first thing right there is add. So we're going to do add. And in parentheses, we have to say what we're putting in there. So I have to create a character sheet item. And what's really cool is I could put some character there, or I could just say new character sheet. And what this will do is it will create a new character sheet. It does not even have a variable name. It's just being added to the list. And the way we're going to access this is by using an index. So I'm going to make an index variable for whatever our current index is, because I don't know if we have 1 thing or 100 things in our character sheet. So I'm going to create a I'm going to create an integer. So we're going to access things in here using integers, and this integer is going to be our current sheet. So right now we've created 1 character. And you might be tempted to say that current sheet equals 1. But here's where computers get strange. They do not start counting at 1. They start oops, I said 0. So computers do not start counting at 1. They start counting at 0. Now I wanted to write a 1, but I am so used to working with computers. Even though my brain was thinking 1, my fingers typed 0. And that's because computers always start counting at 0. 0 is always the first thing. And that has to do with when you're writing numbers in binary and things like that. But we always start with 0. That's always our first thing when computers and programmers are starting to do stuff. Alright, so we have a player list and we have a current character sheet. I'm just going to run this to make sure that everything works. If there's any problem building this, it will happen when the form is loaded. So I might even add some lines here saying, custom code for when the form loads. There we go. We're explaining what we're doing. So let's run and make sure everything works. Everything's working fine. All the buttons should be displaying the information, which we're happy about. We haven't made all the changes that we need to yet. In fact, if you wanted to, we could do that pretty easily. Actually, because of the way we built this, it's going to be incredibly easy. We just have to come down here where it says sum character. And everywhere we have the sum character.name, we're going to have to change this to reference our player list. And the way we reference or get access to what is in an array is we write the name, so player list, but this will give us an error because the player list is not one player but multiple players. And if we used parentheses, that would be like accessing something in a function. What we're going to use is we're going to use the square brackets, the rectangle brackets. And I'm going to put the current sheet as my variable name. And it makes sense. You know, it says current character sheet. That's what the current sheet is. And we're going to take the current sheet from our player list. And I can take this code, copy, and paste it everywhere. Alright, so that's all we have to do. And this should work. I'm going to save it, and I'm going to run, and I'm going to see if this works. Alright, when we hit new sheet, everything is still working. In fact, I am confident enough to say I can delete this. Now, I'm not 100% confident. Maybe I made a mistake. So I'm just going to comment the line out. If my line comments worked, this should work. Ooh, it's running. It didn't break. And even when I run the functions, nothing is broken. So I can actually delete these because I am now confident that we do not need that information. All right, so things are moving pretty well. So and I think this is about maybe even a little bit beyond where we were in class. So we're doing pretty good at the moment. So I'm going to minimize the form 1 here. And we have a method to display the current character sheet. So I'm going to add a little bit more information here when we display the current character sheet. I'm going to add something to it I was just thinking about. When we come in here, we have this sheet 0 of 0. And I'm going to update that variable before I finish this part. So if we have one thing in our list, it should say sheet 1 of 1. And when we run our program, it just says sheet 0 of 0. We have not changed the text. So in our program, I'm going to add a line of code to update our label text. So it's going to be, what is the name of that variable? I have completely forgotten. When we highlight it, it's display information label. There we go. So I start typing, we get the display information label. I'm going to change the text, and it's going to say something new. And it's going to say sheet, and then I'm going to 0. It's going to say sheet plus, and it's going to have sheet, the number, and this number is going to be the current sheet toString of, now remember to put spaces in here. If you don't put spaces, it's going to look kind of funny. Now here I'm noticing this line is actually getting pretty long, and especially because of the way my things are loading, I'm going to just hit enter. We can split lines, and that's fine. So sheet blah 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 of however many things there are. So we want to know how many things are in the player list. Well, we can do that using a special method or a special variable called count. And count is basically the count, or how many things are in the list. So sometimes we would have this all on one line, but I think just to make it readable on the computer screen, I'm putting it on 2. There are also people who will split it into multiple lines, but whatever. So sheet, whatever our sheet number is of that. Let's see if this is working. Maybe there's a mistake in here. I hope not. When we hit last sheet, all right, it says sheet 0 of 1. And we have to remember, oh yeah, the computer starts at 0, but us humans start at 1. And when it's counting the number of elements, if you have one thing in a list, we use the number 0 to access it. So if I have 5 things in my list, I'm going to use the number 4 to access the 5th thing. Because thing number 1, we use 0. For thing number 2, we use 1. So whatever number we want to access, we have to use 1 less than that. So what I should do is I should do the current string plus 1. Now we can't quite write it like this. We have to put everything in parentheses. And what this will do is it will compute this number and then convert it to a string. And I think this will work fine. Oops. I think this will work fine now when we run it. When we click on whatever button we want to click on, it will say sheet 1 of 1. Alright, so in my next, I think we're pretty happy with how things are displaying. Actually, I'm going to do one more thing too. When we create our form, I'm also going to display it. Oops, yeah, not display information. I'm going to display everything. I'm going to, display current character sheet. So when we start, we're going to see the default character sheet right away. So immediately without pushing a button. And the reason I'm going to do this is in the next video, I'm going to start to make the buttons do their jobs. Alright, so I'm going to go through the buttons and make them do their job. And that's what my next video is going to be about. It's going to be really taking these, going through each of these and making them do what they're supposed to do. And I might just go in order. Well, I can't really go in order. So if I'm going to go in order, I have to have more than one sheet, really, to make sure that my other ones are working. So I'm going to update first, then I'm going to add, and then I'll do the last and next, and then we'll delete. Alright, so that's how we're going to make things work. So I'm going to finish up here, and in the next video, I'm going to show you the update button, and we're just going to go down and create these methods, and then we'll be done with our program. And hopefully that won't take too long. Alright, well, thank you for joining me.